The ache was a familiar tenant in Alara's chest. It had lived there for precisely 2 years, 7 months, and 4 days, taking up residence the night Chloe had laughed, thrown her head back in the golden light of a bar, and said, "Oh, me? No, I'm not into girls. I'm aggressively straight." The words had been a guillotine, severing a fragile, budding hope Alara hadn't even realized she was nurturing. Since then, the ache had settled in, a dull, constant throb that flared into a sharp, stabbing pain whenever Chloe called to talk about Mark. Tonight, it was a bonfire. He just doesn't get it, you know? Chloe's voice, a melody even when laced with frustration, crackled through the phone. I tried to explain why the gallery opening was important to me, and he just nodded and asked if we could still make his 7:30 reservation at that steakhouse he loves. The one with the taxidermy. Alara traced the rim of her cooling mug of tea, the ceramic a poor substitute for the warmth she craved. She could picture Chloe perfectly, curled on her beige sofa, the one Mark had picked out, one hand tangled in her honey blonde hair, her brow furrowed in that way that made Alara want to smooth the lines away with her thumb. "He's a creature of habit," Alara offered, her voice carefully neutral. It was a tightrope she walked daily, the balance between supportive best friend and woman silently screaming with love. "He's a creature of boring," Chloe sighed, and the sound was so full of weariness it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Alara's own shoulders. "Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part. The supportive girlfriend. The one who likes steak and doesn't mind taxidermy. But it's not me. Not really." A dangerous flicker of hope, tiny and treacherous, sparked in the cavity of Alara's ribs. She stamped it out immediately. It was a fool's game. Chloe was complaining, yes, but she always complained. It was their ritual. Chloe would vent about Mark's emotional tone deafness, his obsession with his stock portfolio, his complete inability to remember her favorite flower. Alara would listen, offer carefully curated advice that wouldn't betray the frantic beating of her own heart, and then Chloe would hang up, sigh, and go back to him. It was a cycle of exquisite torture. "Have you told him how you feel?" Alara asked, the question tasting like ash in her mouth. She was the architect of her own misery, handing Chloe the blueprints to fix a relationship she desperately wished would crumble. "I've tried. It's like talking to a wall. A very handsome, well-dressed wall that thinks quarterly reports are a love language." There was a pause, a rustle of fabric. "I don't know, Elle. Sometimes I just think, is this it? Is this what love is supposed to feel like? This lukewarm bath?" The ache in Alara's chest twisted into a knot. No, she wanted to scream. Love is a forest fire. It's the sun on your face after a long winter. It's the way my heart stutters when you say my name. It's this agonizing, beautiful thing I feel for you. Instead, she said, maybe you just need a night to yourselves. A real date, no talk about work. Or steak. She heard Chloe take a deep breath. Yeah, maybe the resignation in her voice was the sound of a key turning in a lock, sealing Alara out once again. Anyway, I shouldn't keep you. I just needed to vent. You're the only one who listens. Anytime, Chloe. You know that, and she did. Alara would be her listening post, her confidant, her emotional anchor, until the end of time if she had to. It was a pathetic consolation prize, but it was also everything. It was proximity. It was hearing Chloe's voice. It was being the one she turned to. You're the best, Elle. I don't know what I'd do without you. Each word was a perfect, glittering shard of glass pressed into Alara's heart. I'll always be here, she whispered after Chloe had hung up, the words dissolving into the heavy silence of her apartment. The silence was always the worst part, the space where all the things she couldn't say grew into monstrous shapes that haunted the corners of the room. She looked around her small, cozy living room, the overflowing bookshelves, the soft gray couch that was hers and hers alone, the vibrant abstract painting she'd spent a month on, and it all felt like a waiting room. A life on hold. She had built a world for herself, a good one, but it was a world with a Chloe-shaped hole right in the center. She was a ghost in her own story, watching the main character live hers from the other side of a thick, soundproof wall. For 2 years, 7 months, and 4 days, She had been a master of suppression, of redirecting her feelings into a platonic shape that was acceptable, safe. She had perfected the art of the casual hug that didn't linger too long, the encouraging smile that didn't betray the longing behind it, the easy laugh that covered the sound of her own heart breaking. She often wondered if Chloe had any idea. A part of her, the masochistic part, hoped so. Hoped that on some subconscious level, Chloe knew the depth of the devotion being poured out for her. But the more rational, terrified part of her knew she didn't. To Chloe, Alara was a fixture, a constant. The North Star in her sometimes turbulent sky. Dependable, safe, and completely, utterly, non-threatening. Because Alara was a girl and Chloe was not into girls. The finality of that statement, a casual declaration made in a noisy bar years ago, was the foundation upon which Alara had built her prison of silence. It was an immutable fact of their universe, as certain as gravity or the sunrise. To challenge it would be to challenge the very nature of their friendship, to risk shattering the one precious connection she had with the woman she loved. So she remained quiet, tended to her secret, and learned to live with the ache. It was, she had long ago accepted, simply the price of admission for having Chloe in her life at all. And it was a price she paid, day after day, without complaint. The stasis of her life, the carefully constructed routine of longing and suppression, shattered on a Tuesday. It was just after 11 at night, rain lashing against her apartment windows with a fury that matched the sudden, frantic pounding on her door. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. No one came to her apartment this late, unannounced. She peered through the peephole, and the world tilted on its axis. It was Chloe, drenched and shaking, her hair plastered to her face, mascara running in dark rivers down her cheeks. She was wrapped in a thin cardigan, utterly unprepared for the storm, and she looked smaller than Alara had ever seen her, stripped of her usual vibrant confidence. Alara fumbled with the locks, her fingers clumsy with a sudden, overwhelming surge of panic and concern. She threw the door open. "Chloe? What's wrong? What happened?" Chloe just stared at her for a moment, her blue eyes wide and lost, shimmering with unshed tears. Then a choked sob escaped her lips, and she collapsed into Alara's arms, burying her face in the crook of Alara's neck. Her body was racked with violent tremors, a combination of cold and raw, unfiltered grief. Instinct took over. Alara wrapped her arms tightly around Chloe's shivering frame, kicking the door shut behind them. She held her, murmuring soft, nonsensical words of comfort, her own heartbeat a frantic drum against Chloe's ear. The familiar scent of Chloe's vanilla and sandalwood perfume, now mixed with the cold, clean smell of rain, filled her senses. It was intoxicating and agonizing. Having her this close, this vulnerable, was a brutal kind of heaven. "It's over," Chloe finally managed to whisper, her voice muffled by Alara's sweater. "Mark and I, it's really over." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and momentous. A part of Alara, the selfish, hopeful part she kept locked away, felt a sickening jolt of triumph. But it was immediately drowned out by a wave of pure, unadulterated empathy for the woman sobbing in her arms. This was not a victory. This was Chloe's heartbreaking, and Alara's own heart ached in solidarity. "Okay," Alara said softly, her voice steady despite the hurricane inside her. "Okay, come on. Let's get you out of these wet clothes." She guided Chloe into the living room, her arm a permanent fixture around Chloe's waist, terrified that if she let go, Chloe might simply dissolve into a puddle on the floor. She sat her down on the edge of the couch and disappeared into her bedroom, returning with her softest, warmest sweatpants and an old, oversized university hoodie. She handed them to Chloe without a word, her movements gentle and deliberate. Chloe changed numbly, her gaze fixed on some distant point of pain. Alara took the wet clothes and hung them over the shower rod in the bathroom, her mind racing. This was different from the usual late-night phone calls. This was a rupture. The lukewarm bath had finally gone cold. When she returned, Chloe was curled into a ball on the couch, wrapped in the fluffy gray blanket Alara kept draped over the back. The oversized hoodie swallowed her, making her look like a lost child. Can I? Chloe's voice was a fragile thread of sound. Can I stay here? Just for a little while? I can't. I can't go back there. Not tonight. It was the question that changed everything. It was the catalyst. The world that had tilted when she opened the door now spun into a new, terrifying, and exhilarating orbit. Of course, Alara said, her voice softer than she intended. You can stay as long as you need. She made tea, her hands moving on autopilot. 2 mugs. Earl Grey for her, chamomile for Chloe. She brought them into the living room and set them on the coffee table. Chloe didn't seem to notice. She was just staring at the dark screen of the television, her expression hollow. Alara sat on the other end of the couch, a careful distance between them. She wanted to reach out, to pull Chloe into her arms again, to hold her until all the broken pieces fit back together. But she didn't. That was a line she still couldn't cross. Instead, she just sat with her in the quiet, offering the silent, unwavering support that had become her defining role in Chloe's life. The rain continued its assault on the windows, a percussive soundtrack to the silent demolition of Chloe's world and the beginning of the seismic shift in Alara's. For the first time in a very long time, the ache in her chest was not just pain. It was tangled with a terrifying, electrifying tendril of hope. And it felt like drowning. The next few days blurred into a strange new domesticity. Chloe didn't just stay for the night, she stayed for the week. Her presence transformed Alara's quiet sanctuary. The apartment, once a space defined by solitude and order, was now filled with the soft chaos of another person. A second toothbrush appeared in the holder. A pair of Chloe's brightly colored sneakers lay by the door. The faint scent of her shampoo lingered in the bathroom long after her morning shower. Alara found herself navigating her own home with a heightened awareness that was both thrilling and exhausting. Every movement felt charged. Brushing past Chloe in the narrow hallway sent a jolt of electricity through her skin. The casual way Chloe would drape her legs over Alara's lap while they sat on the couch in the evenings made Alara's breath catch in her throat. She was living in a state of suspended animation, every nerve ending tingling with a proximity she had only ever dreamed of. Chloe, for her part, seemed to be slowly coming back to life. The first couple of days were a haze of tears and quiet grief. She spoke about the breakup in fractured pieces, a mosaic of a relationship that had been crumbling for months. It wasn't one big fight, but a death by 1,000 cuts. The gallery opening had been the final straw, a symbol of a fundamental disconnect she could no longer ignore. It wasn't just that he didn't care about my interests, she explained one evening, her voice still thick with sadness as she picked at the label of a beer bottle. It was that he didn't care to understand me. I felt invisible. Alara just listened, her heart aching for Chloe's pain, a separate entity from the selfish joy that sang in her veins. She saw her. She had always seen her. She saw the flecks of gold in her blue eyes when she was excited, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the fierce loyalty she showed to the people she loved. To be invisible to someone who was supposed to love you seemed like the cruelest kind of blindness. As the week wore on, the grief began to recede, replaced by a tentative calm. And with that calm came a new kind of intimacy between them. Their late-night conversations deepened, shifting from the post-mortem of Chloe's relationship to broader, more vulnerable topics. They lay on the living room floor one night, staring up at the ceiling, the only light coming from the city glow filtering through the window. "What do you think real love is supposed to feel like?" Chloe asked, her voice soft in the darkness. Not the movie version. The real, everyday version. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a test. A minefield. She had to answer honestly, but not too honestly. She chose her words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. "I think," she began, her own voice barely a whisper. "I think it's feeling safe. Like you can be your complete, messy, ridiculous self, and not only will the other person not run away, they'll think you're messy. Ridiculous self is the most wonderful thing they've ever seen." She paused, gathering her courage. "It's feeling seen. Completely. And it's not a big, dramatic fireworks display every day. It's quiet. It's knowing someone is thinking of you when they buy your favorite kind of coffee. It's the way they look at you when you're not paying attention. It's a million tiny moments that build a home inside your heart. There was a long silence. Alara held her breath, convinced she had said too much, that the truth of her feelings was laid bare in her definition. Then Chloe's voice, thick with emotion, cut through the quiet. I've never had that. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. A sad, simple, and devastating admission. In the darkness, Alara felt Chloe's hand search for hers. Their fingers brushed, a spark of contact that felt seismic. Chloe's fingers intertwined with hers, her grasp firm and certain. They just lay there, holding hands in the dark, and Alara felt a profound shift in the very ground beneath them. This was no longer just friendship. It was something else, something unnamed and fragile and terrifyingly real. The physical contact, once a rarity, began to escalate. It was never overt, always couched in the plausible deniability of friendship. A hug that lingered a few seconds too long in the morning. Chloe's head finding its way to Alara's shoulder during a movie, her soft breathing a warm, steady rhythm against Alara's neck. Alara brushing a stray piece of hair from Chloe's face, her fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second against the softness of her cheek. One afternoon, while Alara was sketching at the kitchen table, Chloe came up behind her to look over her shoulder. She leaned in close, her chin resting near Alara's shoulder, her warmth seeping into Alara's back. That's beautiful, Chloe murmured, her breath ghosting over Alara's ear. Alara's hand froze mid-stroke, the pencil suddenly heavy and foreign in her grip. She could feel the frantic pulse in her own neck, and she was certain Chloe could feel it too. And then came the looks. Alara started catching Chloe watching her. It was different from before. It wasn't the easy, open gaze of a friend. It was something more intense, more curious. More than once, Alara would look up from her book or her laptop to find Chloe's eyes on her, a soft, unreadable expression on her face. And then, for the first time, Alara saw it. Chloe's gaze, which had been fixed on Alara's eyes, dropped. It traveled down, slowly, deliberately, and rested on Alara's mouth. It was only for a second. A heartbeat. But in that second, the air in the room crackled and solidified, becoming thick and heavy with unspoken questions. Chloe's eyes darted back up to meet Alara's, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, and she quickly looked away, pretending to be interested in something on the television. But the moment had happened. The line had been crossed, not with a touch, but with a look. It was a silent acknowledgement of a possibility that had, until now, been unthinkable. The safe, platonic ground they had stood on for years had crumbled away, leaving them suspended over a deep, dizzying canyon of what-ifs. Alara's carefully constructed prison of silence was beginning to feel less like a fortress and more like a cage made of glass, about to shatter at the slightest touch. The ache in her chest was no longer just an ache. It was a living thing, a frantic bird beating its wings against her ribs, desperate to be set free. The delicate, high-wire tension that had come to define their new reality couldn't last. Alara knew this. It was a bubble of unspoken feelings and charged glances, beautiful and shimmering, but destined to pop. The constant proximity to Chloe, the escalating intimacy, was wearing down her defenses. She was starting to forget her lines, to let her true feelings show in the softness of her gaze, in the way she'd instinctively reach for Chloe's hand. Out of sheer self-preservation, she began to pull back. It was subtle at first. She'd sit on the armchair instead of the couch. She'd find reasons to be busy in her office with the door closed. She'd answer Chloe's questions with a brevity that felt foreign and clipped. She was trying to rebuild the walls, to put a safe distance between them before she did something stupid, like lean in when Chloe's head was on her shoulder, or confess 3 years of repressed love over a bowl of cereal. Her retreat, however, did not go unnoticed. Chloe, who had been slowly, tentatively blooming in the warmth of Alara's apartment, began to wilt. A furrow of confusion was now permanently etched between her brows. The easy laughter that had started to return to her voice faded into a watchful silence. The confrontation came on a Saturday night, 2.5 weeks after Chloe had first appeared on her doorstep. They had ordered pizza and were meant to be having a movie night, returned to one of their old, easy rituals. But the ease was gone. The air was thick with Alara's manufactured distance. She sat rigidly on one end of the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, while Chloe was curled on the other, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. Finally, Chloe couldn't take it anymore. She muted the television, the sudden silence deafening. "Okay, what is it?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. Alara feigned ignorance, a pathetic and transparent defense. "What's what?" "I'm just watching the movie." "No, you're not," Chloe said, turning to face her fully. Her blue eyes were searching, insistent. "You're a million miles away. You have been for days. You've been hiding from me, Alara, and I want to know why. Did I do something? Am I overstaying my welcome? You can tell me." The earnest vulnerability in her voice was a physical blow. Alara's carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. Of all the things she had feared, hurting Chloe had always been at the top of the list. "No," Alara whispered, the word catching in her throat. "No, Chloe, it's not you. You could never overstay your welcome." "Then what is it?" Chloe pressed, her voice softening. "Talk to me. You're my best friend. You can tell me anything." The irony was so thick Alara could have choked on it. Her best friend. The one person she couldn't tell the one thing that mattered most. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of Alara's frantic heartbeat. Chloe seemed to interpret her silence as something else entirely. She moved closer, her expression shifting from confusion to a dawning, hesitant understanding. She looked down at her hands, then back up at Alara, her gaze raw and open. Is it because of this?" Chloe asked, gesturing to the space between them, a space that felt charged with enough electricity to power the entire city. "Because of us." Alara could only nod, a tiny, jerky movement. The truth was out, or at least, the shadow of it was. Chloe let out a long, shaky breath. "I thought I was imagining it," she said, her voice barely audible. "But it's not just me, is it?" She looked at Alara, her eyes pleading for honesty. "This feeling, it's real." The subtext had finally become text. There was no going back. "I've been so confused," Chloe continued, her words tumbling out in a rush as if a dam had broken. "Since I got here, I've felt more like myself than I have in years. I feel safe with you. I feel seen." She was echoing Alara's own words from their late-night conversation, and the recognition sent a tremor through Alara's body. "And with Mark, I was just playing a role. With you, I don't have to pretend. And it's messing with my head." She paused, biting her lip. She looked terrified, as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to say something that could change everything. I think I might not be as straight as I thought I was," she whispered, the words hanging in the air like motes of dust in a sunbeam. "Maybe I've just been looking for the wrong things in the wrong people. Or maybe," her voice dropped even lower, becoming intensely personal, intimate. "Maybe it's not about guys or girls. Maybe it's just you." Alara's world stopped spinning. The air left her lungs in a silent whoosh. This was it. The point of no return. Chloe's gaze dropped to Alara's mouth, and this time, it stayed there. The look was no longer fleeting or accidental. It was deliberate. It was a question. "I've been thinking about it," Chloe confessed, her voice thick. "A lot. About what it would be like to kiss you." She finally met Alara's eyes again, her own wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. "I remember telling you years ago that I wasn't into girls. I was so sure. But being here with you, it makes me question everything I thought I knew about myself." She reached out, her hand hesitating in the air for a moment before she gently cupped Alara's cheek. Her thumb stroked softly against Alara's skin, a touch so tender it felt like a brand. "I'm not into girls," Chloe repeated, her voice a fragile whisper. The words that had once been a guillotine now sounded like a plea. "But I think I might be into you." She leaned in closer, their faces just inches apart, her breath warm against Alara's lips. "So prove me wrong, Alara. Please, prove me wrong." The world, which had stopped, suddenly came rushing back in a torrent of sensation and emotion. Chloe's plea was not a challenge, it was an invitation. It was permission. It was the key to a door Alara had believed was welded shut forever. The terror that had lived in her heart for so long was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a hope so fierce and bright it was blinding. Chloe, Alara breathed, the name a prayer on her lips. And as she spoke, she realized the decision had already been made. There was no other choice. She couldn't live in the silence anymore. I have to tell you something first, Alara said, her voice shaking but clear. She needed Chloe to know. She needed the truth to be the foundation of whatever this was about to become. Chloe's hand was still on her cheek, her thumb a steady, grounding pressure. Her eyes, wide and searching, never left Alara's. This isn't new for me, Alara confessed, the words feeling enormous and heavy as they left her mouth. What you're feeling, this confusion, for me, it's been certainty. For a long, long time, she took a deep, shuddering breath, the final wall of her prison turning to dust. I've been in love with you for 2 years, 7 months, and 18 days. The specificity of it, the raw, unvarnished truth, hung between them. She watched as a series of emotions flickered across Chloe's face, shock, confusion, and then a slow, dawning realization that was so profound it was like watching the sun rise. The pieces of their past, all those late-night calls, the unwavering support, the way Alara looked at her, it all clicked into place. A single tear escaped Chloe's eye and traced a path down her cheek. "Oh, Elle," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of that revelation. "All this time? You've been, and I never knew it wasn't an accusation." It was a lament for years of missed signals and unspoken truths. "I was too scared to lose you," Alara admitted, her own tears beginning to well. "You said you weren't into girls, and I believed you. I would have taken a lifetime of just being your friend over the risk of losing you completely." Chloe's expression softened into one of overwhelming tenderness. She used her thumb to wipe away one of Alara's tears, her touch impossibly gentle. "You could never lose me," she said, her voice thick with conviction. "Don't you know that by now?" She leaned in, her forehead coming to rest against Alara's. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, their heartbeats a syncopated rhythm in the quiet room. "I think," Chloe said softly, her lips brushing against Alara's as she spoke, sending a shower of sparks through Alara's entire body, "that I've been falling in love with you since the moment you opened that door in the rain. I just didn't have the words for it. And that was it. The mutual confession. The laying down of arms. The complete and total surrender to the truth that had been circling them for weeks." Chloe pulled back just enough to look into Alara's eyes. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by a quiet, stunning certainty. "Can I?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Can I kiss you, Alara?" It was the question Alara had dreamed of hearing, a fantasy she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times. But the reality of it was more potent, more terrifying, and more beautiful than anything she could have ever imagined. She couldn't find her voice, so she just nodded, a single, decisive movement. That was all the confirmation Chloe needed. She closed the small distance between them, and then her lips met Alara's. The first touch was impossibly soft, tentative, a question asked without words. It was just the gentle pressure of her mouth against Alara's, a moment of discovery. Alara's entire body ignited. It was a jolt of pure electricity, a feeling so intense it almost hurt. Her eyes fluttered shut, and she brought a shaky hand up to cup the back of Chloe's neck, her fingers tangling in the soft strands of her hair. This small act of participation seemed to be the answer Chloe was looking for. The kiss deepened. The initial hesitation melted away, replaced by an urgency, a passion that spoke of weeks of unspoken tension and years of hidden longing. It was no longer just a kiss, it was a conversation. It was Chloe saying, "I see you." It was Alara answering, "I'm here. I've always been here." Chloe's other hand came up to mirror the first, her hands framing Alara's face, as if she were something precious, something to be cherished. Alara's arms wrapped around Chloe's waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them, just the frantic beating of two hearts finally finding their rhythm together. The kiss was rain and vanilla and hope. It was the taste of salt from their tears and the sweet promise of a new beginning. It was every conversation they'd ever had, every secret glance, every moment of shared laughter, all culminating in this one, perfect, world-altering point of contact. It was everything. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, their chests rising and falling in unison. They didn't move away, instead resting their foreheads together again, their eyes still closed, savoring the aftermath. The air around them felt different, rarefied. The silence was no longer heavy with things unsaid, but full of a peaceful, profound understanding. Wow, Chloe breathed out, the word a cloud of warm air against Alara's lips. Oh, was all Alara could manage, her mind still reeling, her lips still tingling from the pressure of Chloe's. Chloe opened her eyes, and Alara followed suit. She was met with a gaze so full of wonder and affection that it stole her breath all over again. That felt, Chloe started, then paused, searching for the right word. She settled on a simple one, but it held the weight of the universe. Right. Yeah, Alara agreed, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time in what felt like years. It really did. The ache in her chest, the constant companion of her adult life, was gone. In its place was a warmth that spread through her veins, a feeling of wholeness she had never known. She had been proven wrong about so much. She had believed her love was a burden, a secret to be hidden. But it wasn't. It was a bridge. And Chloe had just walked across it. In the quiet aftermath of the kiss, a new reality began to settle in, soft and fragile as a newborn bird. They remained on the couch, tangled together, not speaking for a long time. There was too much to process, too much had changed in the span of a single conversation. The world Alara had woken up in that morning was not the same world she was living in now. It was Chloe who broke the silence, her voice a little shaky, a little odd. I'm terrified. Alara looked at her, surprised by the admission, but a wave of relief washed over her. Me too, she confessed, her voice equally unsteady. I'm absolutely, completely terrified. The shared fear was an anchor, not a wedge. It was an acknowledgement of the magnitude of what had just happened. They had not just started a new relationship, they had fundamentally altered the landscape of their lives. What does this even mean? Chloe asked, pulling back slightly to look Alara in the eye. Her expression was open, vulnerable, searching for a map in this new, uncharted territory. For us? For everything. I don't know, Alara answered, and the honesty of it was freeing. I have no idea. But for the first time, I feel like we can figure it out. Together. The word together hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. It was a word they had used before, but now it had a different weight, a new definition. Chloe seemed to be recontextualizing their entire history, her eyes distant as she pieced things together. It's so strange, she murmured, almost to herself. Looking back now, it all makes a different kind of sense. She turned her gaze back to Alara, a look of dawning comprehension on her face. Every time I complained to you about Mark, about what was missing, I think I was subconsciously measuring him against what I had with you. And he always came up short. They all did. The confession was a balm on old wounds Alara hadn't even realized were still bleeding. The hours she had spent listening, her heart twisting with jealousy and love, were not just moments of pain. They were the moments Chloe was realizing, without knowing it, that her heart already belonged somewhere else. I felt like I was searching for something, Chloe continued, her hand finding Alara's again, their fingers intertwining in a now familiar, comforting gesture. A connection, a feeling of being home. I kept trying to find it in these guys who were perfectly fine on paper, but it was never there. I thought there was something wrong with me. But the whole time, it was right here. She squeezed Alara's hand. It was you. Alara felt a fresh wave of tears prick her eyes, but these were different. They weren't tears of longing or sadness, but of a profound, bone-deep relief. To be seen, to be understood so completely, it was everything she had ever wanted. So, what do we do now? Alara asked, the practicalities of the situation starting to surface. You still have an apartment full of your things. Anne. Mark. Chloe winced at his name. I'll deal with Mark. I need to get my stuff. I'll text him tomorrow, arrange a time when he's not there. She said it with a resolve that Alara had never heard in her voice before. The weariness was gone, replaced by a firm sense of purpose. That part of my life is over. It was over long before I showed up here. And us? Alara asked, the words still feeling new and fragile on her tongue. Chloe smiled, a small, soft curve of her lips that made Alara's heart flutter. Us, she repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. She grew serious again. We take it one day at a time. We figure it out. We'll probably be awkward and mess up, but we'll do it together. She leaned in and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to Alara's forehead. I'm not scared of the future anymore. Not with you. That night, for the first time, Chloe didn't sleep on the couch. After they had talked for hours more, their voices growing soft with exhaustion and emotion, Alara had stood up. Come on, she had said, holding out a hand. Chloe had taken it without hesitation. Alara led her to her bedroom, to her bed, a space that had felt achingly empty for so long. There was no grand romantic gesture, no more passionate kisses. Instead, they just crawled under the covers, their bodies curling towards each other as if by instinct. Chloe rested her head on Alara's chest, her arm draped loosely over her stomach. Alara wrapped her own arm around Chloe's shoulders, her hand resting on her back, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. It was an intimacy more profound than any kiss. It was the intimacy of safety, of comfort, of home. As Alara drifted off to sleep, with the weight of Chloe warm and real against her, she understood that the ache in her chest had not just disappeared. It had been transformed into a quiet, steady, and luminous joy. 3 months later, the morning light streamed into Alara's apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The space felt different now. It was no longer just her sanctuary, it was theirs. A second coffee mug, a bright yellow one that Chloe had bought, sat next to Alara's simple white one by the coffee maker. A stack of Chloe's novels had taken up permanent residence on the nightstand. The faint scent of vanilla and sandalwood was now a permanent, comforting layer to the apartment's atmosphere. It smelled like home. Alara was standing at the counter, sleepily pouring hot water over coffee grounds, when a pair of arms wrapped around her waist from behind. A soft chin rested on her shoulder. Morning, Chloe murmured, her voice husky with sleep. She pressed a kiss to the side of Alara's neck, a casual, easy gesture that still sent a shiver of delight down Alara's spine. Morning, Alara replied, leaning back into the embrace. Coffee's almost ready. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. The first few weeks had been a navigation, a gentle dance of learning each other in this new context. There had been moments of awkwardness, flashes of fear, and long conversations about what they wanted and who they were becoming. Chloe had dealt with Mark, a clean and final break that had been more relief than heartbreak. She had moved her things, box by box, into Alara's apartment, each item a small brick in the new life they were building together. There was an easiness between them now, a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. They could spend hours in the same room, Alara painting and Chloe reading, without needing to speak, yet feeling completely connected. The desperate, aching tension that had once defined their interactions had been replaced by a deep, abiding peace. Chloe released her and moved to the fridge, pulling out the milk. Big day today, she said, pouring a splash into her yellow mug. Parent-teacher conferences. I need all the caffeine I can get to deal with Mrs. Davison and her theories on little Timothy's gluten-induced tantrums. Alara laughed, pouring her own coffee. You'll be great. You're always great with them. She watched as Chloe leaned against the counter, taking a sip of her coffee, her eyes bright and clear. The hollow, lost look she'd had the night she arrived was a distant memory, replaced by a vibrant confidence that seemed to radiate from within. She looked happy. She looked whole. It's because I'm happy, Chloe said, as if reading her mind. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of Alara's jaw. You did this. You brought me back to life. No, Alara said, her voice soft but firm, covering Chloe's hand with her own. You did that yourself. I just held the door open for you. Chloe smiled, a radiant expression that lit up her entire face. Then I'm glad it was your door. They stood there for a moment in the sun-drenched kitchen, the aroma of coffee filling the air, a perfect, simple moment of domestic bliss. It was everything Alara had secretly, desperately wanted, and more than she had ever allowed herself to hope for. The journey had been terrifying, a walk across a chasm of fear and uncertainty. But the other side, this place of quiet love and easy mornings, was worth every single terrifying step. Later that evening, after Chloe had returned, exhausted but victorious from her conferences, they were curled up on the couch, the same couch where their world had tilted and then righted itself. A documentary about penguins played quietly on the television, ignored by both of them. You know, Chloe said, her head resting in Alara's lap as Alara's fingers idly stroked through her hair. Sometimes I think about that night. The night I asked you to prove me wrong. Alara's hand stilled for a moment. I think about it too. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, Chloe admitted. To admit all that confusion, to be that vulnerable. It felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. I felt like I was at the bottom of the cliff, hoping you'd jump, Alara said quietly. Chloe twisted her head to look up at her, her blue eyes full of a love so deep and certain it still made Alara's breath catch. I'm so glad I did, she reached up and cupped Alara's cheek. It turns out I was never aggressively straight. I was just aggressively waiting for you. Alara leaned down and kissed her, a slow, sweet kiss full of unspoken gratitude and the quiet certainty of their shared future. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee and contentment and the beautiful, undeniable truth of their love. It was no longer a question or a discovery, but a statement. This is us. This is right. She understood now that some of the most beautiful love stories are not the ones that start with a thunderclap, but the ones that whisper in the background for years, waiting patiently for the right moment to finally be heard. And as she held Chloe in her arms, in their home, she knew she was exactly where she was always meant to be.